I couldn't help but notice that you've clicked on and are presently listening to an episode of the Paranormal Patio podcast. Thanks a lot. I appreciate your support. And if you want to continue to support us, the best thing you can do is share our episodes on social media. That's right. You can tag us in everything. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also find us on paranormalpatio.com, where you'll find articles, links to information from our past guests, as well as, every episode as it comes out. Also, head on over to Patreon. Patreon.com/BeyondThePatio. You can get a monthly live stream, at least one. Sometimes we do more. Exclusive bonus content, early access to all of our episodes. And starting with Season 3, I've got to move Season 1 to the archives. So they'll be on Patreon as well, and you can listen to them there. Thanks again for your support. And hey, let's get into the episode. What kind of weird thing are we talking about today? In this episode, we're welcoming back Nathan Isaac of the wonderful podcast Penny Royal. Also, you've probably seen him on Hellier. If you haven't watched Hellier yet, I'm running out of excuses to make for you guys who haven't watched it. You've been listening to this show for quite some time, and it comes up a lot. So you should really make some time to sit down and watch Hellier. At any rate, right now you're here to listen to my show. And you know what? I love you for it. Nathan is back. He joined us for episode 1 of season 2 and brought Darian with him that time. Tonight he's flying solo, representing Penny Royal all by himself in the wonderful town of Somerset, Kentucky. This is sort of a special episode in that when this episode comes out on April 15th, we will be 10 days away from the 2-year anniversary of Paranormal Patio. How about that? 2 years. It's insane. The next episode will be out on the 29th. So I'm going to consider this the anniversary episode. Now, this was not planned. It just kind of happened that way by schedule. And I realized yesterday that the 2-year anniversary is coming up. So yeah, this is a good way to end 2 years and kick off year 3 of the show. Nathan and I are going to be talking about Penny Royal. We're going to be talking about Somerset. We're going to be talking about Bigfoot and Magick and conspiracies and weird historical connections. It's a grab bag. You never know what you're going to get whenever you get Nathan Isaac on the phone. So enjoy, sit back, relax. Also, this was recorded live during a Patreon exclusive live stream where we actually had video and chat and all that good stuff. So if you want to get in on the next one of those, which will be an anniversary party, head over to patreon.com/BeyondThePatio, get signed up and hang out with us on our live streams once a month exclusively for Patreon members.
You're listening to the Paranormal Patio Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Paranormal Patio. As always, I'm Jason. We are doing a live stream for the Patreon / live recording for an episode of Paranormal Patio. And I am pleased and honored and privileged to have the one and only Nathan Isaac right back here in the Paranormal Patio. Nathan, welcome back to the Paranormal Patio.
Hey man, how are you doing, dude?
I'm good, man. I'm good. How are things in Somerset, Kentucky?
They're as strange as ever, man.
I love it. I love it. I love that you're back. We had a chance to catch up in January at the release party for Penny Royal Season 2, which was a great time. Thanks for inviting me down. I had a blast.
Thanks for coming to it too, man. I know it's quite a haul for you to get down here, you know. But
it is, but it's worth it every time. I think I'm going to come down again for the Goblin Market. That
are you really?
Doing. I'm thinking about it. Yeah,
if I can make it work out. Man. Yeah. That's going to be fun. Dan was like, "So what are you going to do?" And I was like, "I'm going to trade stickers for stories. I'll give people stickers if they'll give me a great story. So
I love it. What a fun concept. It's the old bartering system, you know.
That's the whole goblin market thing is supposed to be kind of like barter based, you know. Plus it's part of his Aunt Lou Day, which is you know, a witch. The thing though that we found out is that that witch Aunt Lou, her last name is Tartar. One of her family members that I guess maintained her legacy was this guy named Judge Tartar. And so the house that we just bought, the farm we just bought and moved into, is the house that Judge Tartar built, right? And so Dan was over here and we were like, he was telling us these stories and he was like, yeah, Judge Tartar. And I'm like, you're in Judge Tartar's house. And it was like, holy shit.
A lot has happened since the last time that you were on Paranormal Patio officially in an episode. That was back in November of 2020, I think, was when we hooked up the first time. And of course, you were on a live stream for the Hurricane Ida relief with Greenfield and Lonnie Scott, which, you know, it was a good time. You had a good time. You had a really good time.
Too good of a time.
Too good of a time. So what's been going on with the ongoing Pennyroyal project since we last spoke?
Oh man, where to start? I mean, obviously, you know a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're in the second season as well.
I am. Thank you.
After the first season, obviously we kept chugging, finishing up the second season. I started releasing that in January. It's been really crazy releasing the show. You know, the second season is somewhat different than the first season, I guess, in terms of format, kind of, you know. Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's a different focus, I guess. And I think the story kind of widens out. But yeah, man, things have gotten a little stranger in a more focused way. I guess a lot of things that are happening now are because of the show, right? And so, and obviously that's something that we've talked about quite a bit on the show, but also, you know, you and I have talked about this and a lot of other people about hyperstitions. And we talk a lot about that. And I think there's definitely a hyperstitional quality to it now, but I can't say that that's really true if it's just crazy synchronicities, you know? We just had a bunch of stuff happen that's going to be in the third season. Oh. Which is really weird, man. You know what I mean? And it was like because of the second season. You know, people were sending me messages. Again, a lot of fantastic, you know, fans and just other researchers that listen to the show sent me, you know, they would listen to the show and it would cause a spark. They would remember something or make a connection and then send me this big long email saying, hey, love the show. Have you thought about this? And a few of those were pretty right on the mark in terms of some like very personal stuff that no one knows, you know. I told Darian, I was like, this is the third season, you know what I mean? Like it's forming itself out of this, you know. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I don't know. It's such a strange thing. It's like a weird, continuously unfolding thing, you know. But yeah, I mean, things have just been as crazy as ever, you know, since the second season came out, you know, in January. And I don't know, it's just been really fascinating. You know, and the big thing too is I have really, really enjoyed over the last year interviewing so many people. And talking to a lot of people. A lot of people I respect everybody. I love everybody that's a guest on the show, but I really think the second season, you know, getting to talk to like Bosley and, you know, Adam Gorightly's in it. And, you know, there's just a lot of people that I think are, you know, they're really well respected researchers, you know, the older generation. Not that those guys are old. I'm sure they'd be like, what? But I do feel like, in a weird way that we, you know, the stuff you're working on, the stuff we're working on, a lot of the people in the circle, you know, it's like this weird circle of researchers of this generation. And, you know, and getting to talk to Alan Greenfield and having him on the show. And he and I talked a lot about, you know, he's writing that book, Saucers and Sorcerers. It's about the first generation of UFO researchers that he thinks are never really addressed as much as the John Keels and those types of, you know, Jacques Vallée, but that there's an original generation, you know, the Mosleys and whatnot. And so he really wants to highlight that. And yeah, I mean, it's just interesting to see all of those different generations of researchers. And then I feel like whatever's happening right now in the paranormal community, in the Fortean community, the conspiracy community, there's sort of I feel like it's not like things have ever died out, but it does feel like a resurgence in a weird way, because we all are sort of telling new stories or connecting with stories that people forgot about, definitely with like Ed Dorpa,
Yeah.
and now, you know what I mean? Like it's crazy how some of this stuff has come back around, or it's just been waiting for the right time,
Yeah, and I think another aspect of that is just a different viewpoint, right? Because whenever the old guard was the guard, there's fresh eyes on that now. And so we're seeing it with other connections that didn't exist at the time. So it's not even so much a rediscovery. It's like almost like a reboot, right? Like a Hollywood reboot of everything that's going on. So
that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
It's fun. It's fun. It's like everything is exciting, even if it's something that everybody knows about. Now there's this new angle on it, right? And now there's this connection to something else that is just as big or even bigger. And it all just cycles itself back in, right?
Yeah. And it's funny too, like some stuff that older generations of researchers knew about, but didn't see any significance in.
Yeah.
And then now we're like, wait a second, what about this? This is crazy, I think it's really nuts that nobody at the time, of Usenet, right? That Kansan 1225 stuff, right? That I was telling you about, that there's this weird poster on the Usenet groups who sounds exactly like, or he writes exactly like James Shelby Downard. But he didn't start until 2 years after Downard's death. You know what I mean? So it's like, obviously not Downard, but that guy, the stuff he's putting online is absolutely crazy. I mean, it's like insane conspiracy theories. And then it turns out he was stalking Claudia Schiffer or
somebody like that.
Somebody like really famous, some famous model or actress, like seriously stalking her though, not a joke, like was really stalking her. So that's like a weird element of it. Yeah. It's just, it's one of those strange things that people sort of accepted it at the time as just sort of like, oh, that guy's crazy, right? But now looking back on it in the context of the research we've been doing with James Shelby Downard and all this stuff, it's like, man, that's real fascinating. Like, we need to dig into that because that's, what's in that guy's rantings and ravings that is relevant to some of the research we're doing right now,
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of the research that you're doing now, as of this point where we're having this conversation, Pennyroyal Season 2 has not finished up yet. By the time this episode comes out, it's possible that it will have already concluded. So are we going to hear any more about Gaterma in Season 2?
No. I mean, there's not, I'm definitely going to reference him in terms of this idea of like hyperstitions and information structures and things. The final episode is really sort of talking a lot about how I'm return to the cybernetics binary code and kind of tying together all that stuff that we've kind of found, and then setting up the third season, which I already knew where I was going to go with the third season, even before halfway through the second. This is 9 months ago, I knew where I was going to go with the third season, because there is more of the story to tell. But again, what I was talking about with people messaging me and sending me stuff, it's weird how what I've been sent lines up with what I already have sketched out,
That is weird.
Yeah, it's really like very synchronous. But we won't be talking about Gaterma in the final episode. I do plan on, once the second season is finished, I'm going back into the research phase again, which I've been kind of, with all this stuff that people are sending me, it's hard not to get distracted and start looking at some of this stuff. And it's like, got to get this stuff out, and then I can start looking at it. There's a lot of new stuff with James Shelby Downard that we found that I really want to dig into, but definitely the Gaterma side, I found some new connections between Gaterma and then Downard's ex-wife's new husband, Alan Whitwer. So it's like Gaterma, and so it's a connection between, we talk about it in this most recent episode 9, we talk about Wycliffe Draper, who was a very wealthy debutante sort of in the early 1900s, whose family was the largest slave owners in Kentucky, right? He ended up being pretty much the primary founder of or funder of the eugenics movement, right? So anyway, I was looking something up related to Downard. Boom. It was an article that connected Draper to Willis Carto and the Liberty Lobby, which ties in Hoffman and Grimstead. and that they were tied into Mick Murchison, who owned the Del Charo Hotel, and that's where Alan Whitwer, Downard's ex-wife's new husband, was the manager, who says he overheard those guys discussing JFK's assassination, right? And so it's this whole storyline that kind of ties in with Meyer Lansky, who was Gaterma's business partner at the Desert Inn, right? And then because of Gaterma's grift, the Desert Inn was forced to be sold, and Howard Hughes bought it. And that's where Hughes was staying in the penthouse when he was abducted by the Mormons, supposedly, right? It's just a crazy thing. And it was like, I couldn't believe that there was such a solid connection between Gaterma, Meyer Lansky, and Mo Dalitz. And then this Willis Carto, the Liberty Lobby, you know. I'm going to be digging into that heavily. In the second season, I didn't get a focus as much as I wanted to on the FBI files that we got from about Gaterma. I mean, we could do a whole thing on Gaterma. Oh, here's something that we are going to do, which is, I think it'll be cool, is after the second season is over with, before we get into the third season, you know, it's going to be at least a year, you know, before I put that out, because I've got a lot of interviews to do and stuff for prep for that. But I want to do Pennyroyal 93, which is 1993, what was happening here in Somerset. There's a bunch of crazy things. And then Pennyroyal 73, which was what was happening at Oakwood. And then Pennyroyal 53. And these are just single episodes, standalone episodes that really focus on all the weird stuff that year that was happening here in Somerset. And then the fourth one that we're going to do is Pennyroyal 33, which is both a joke on, you know, Freemasonry and all the weird stuff that was happening with the morphine trade here in Somerset. So, no, I mean, but I thought that would be kind of a cool way to sort of put hyper focus on sort of the historical underpinnings of the weirdness that was happening here. So I'm going to do those things, not to be too tangential, but I don't think you mind, right?
No, never.
I was contacted by a journalist, and you're the first one to hear about this, man.
Oh, exclusive content.
Exclusive content, right? So, and I love this. I love this. A journalist from Switzerland sent me a message, right? And then it was like, love the show, love the work you're doing. About 10 years ago, I was doing research on the Erickson Bigfoot project. I wasn't aware of this when I read about it, because he said, look this up, just look up Erickson Bigfoot project. When I did, it was, I guess, 2013 or so, I think. It was the Squatch DNA case. Do you remember this?
Yeah, I do.
They said that they had footage of a Squatch, and it was in Kentucky, in northern Kentucky, is where they found the Squatch, have footage of the Squatch, and then got DNA evidence. But the group is from North Texas, right? It's like the North Texas Bigfoot Association. But they spent $500,000 supposedly over 5 years doing this research. They told everybody. I mean, ABC has a news conference. This was like national news when they announced this, right? But then nothing ever came of it. Right? They're like, we've got it. We've proven this is a 150,000-year-old hominid or some crazy shit. And so this Swiss journalist from there interviewed everybody, like called them up and like did audio interviews and wrote to these people, like the people involved and just everybody, the witnesses and stuff. He said he was trying to put together a story for like a major paper to do on this particular subject. And then all of a sudden everybody went quiet, right? He couldn't get in contact with anyone. And so he's like, I have all of these interviews. I have all of this stuff. And most of it is focused on Kentucky. And he's like, if you want access to this and want to start looking into this story, I'd love to share this with you. And so I was like, man, that would make for a pretty fantastic sort of sidecar story, for Pennyroyal to take, just do a little 3 or 4 special episode thing and get with him and sort of really look at the belief in Bigfoot as a flesh and blood creature. But really, is it a flesh and blood creature? You know what I mean? It's obviously something we explore when we talk to, what's his name? The guy that we had on our live stream from Northern Kentucky.
Yeah.
I can't think of his name off the top of my head right now, but whenever we talked to him, remember, I don't know if you saw that live stream or not, but he was like, I was asking him about seeing weird things. And it was like, nope, never seen anything weird. And it was like, well, yeah, there were like these balls of light, that Bigfoot might have turned into, but that's ridiculous, and it's like, but still, you're not even questioning whether that's an aspect of the phenomena, So in terms of a hoax about Bigfoot, and so this idea of what's real and what's not real, amongst these people who are Bigfoot researchers, I think would be a great story, man. You know, I'm curious what audio bits and interviews this guy has. So I'm very interested in talking to him and seeing if we can put something together to kind of, go a little deeper into that aspect of Kentucky lore,
Yeah. So I remember that live stream very vividly because after it was over, Kyle had sent me a message and said, "Hey, this guy is wanting to talk to you." And I was like, okay, I wonder why, but whatever. Sure. Yeah, go ahead and give him my contact. So he sends me a message and he said, there's a guy in my group that lives in, I won't say where, in Illinois. And he has done a lot of, like Bigfoot hunting around where he lives. Yeah, sure enough. It's the town I was born in. It's like 40 minutes from me, right? So he's like, would you reach out to him and talk to him? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. So I think I've told you the story personally. It's been on the podcast. People do or don't listen. But there's this Bigfoot story that my friend Keith told at the beginning of season 3. It's a really crazy Bigfoot story. That area is equidistant from the two places that your guest on that live stream and this other guy have investigated. Like, it's right in the middle. That place is right smack dab in the middle. Okay. So I'm talking to this guy from up by me, and he's like, the first time that I saw like red eye shine while I was Bigfoot hunting was around the area where you're talking about. And I was like, that's crazy. Like, what are the odds of all of this? Like, I'm just chiming in the chat on your live stream, for that episode. And he has all this stuff. So when it warms up a little bit more, I'm actually meeting up with the guy who lives up here. And we're going to go to the cemetery where my friend Keith and I went, and then where my friend Levi and I went this past January. It's this weird window hotspot where there is a Bigfoot in the area that is known as the she-ape. Okay. And there's also independent floating balls of light in the cemetery that I have seen. I saw one.
No way.
And, yeah. So like the whole Bigfoot turned into balls of light thing, like, yeah, just all of it is churning away here while you're talking. So it's pretty nuts.
Well, so does it, does the activity center on the cemetery? Like, yes. Is there really, dude? Have you talked to Josh Cutchin about this at all?
I did. Yeah.
What did he think? Was he kind of like,
it's Cutchin, it's like, that's the Cutchin theory, right? The whole thing, because also while we were there, when I went with Keith back in August to the cemetery for the first time, we saw a UFO in the cemetery. Yeah. While we were there, you
got to take me there, man. Like,
it's so nuts. Well, yeah, come up anytime. I'll take you there. So we're in the cemetery and we hear these big crashes in the woods. The cemetery is about a mile from the river. The river is this spot on the river is about 5 miles from where Keith had this Bigfoot encounter. He hears these big crashes. I hear these big crashes. He turns white as a sheet and his eyes are like saucers because he has been like touching Bigfoot, like literally within 3 feet. He touched toes with Bigfoot through the side of a tent. Okay. So he's freaking out a little bit because we're right in the same area. We hear these enormous crashes that don't make any sense. And so it stops and we hear this breathing sound coming from the edge of the woods. It stops. He's freaked out. And I'm like, okay, let's just change focus a little bit, get our minds, settled a little bit. We're in a cemetery. I'm not a ghost hunter. We have an audio recorder going. Let's play a Civil War song because there's some Civil War graves in the cemetery. So we play Hell on the Wabash. When we're playing it, we notice this light overhead, like moving super fast across the sky from south to north. So I pull out my phone app that has air flight like traffic control on it, right? So I'm looking to see if there's any airplanes in the area, which it didn't look like an airplane anyway. I mean, it was all solid white, yellow type of color. And so the closest one was like 45 minutes away, and it was going from north to southeast. So there was nothing else there. While I'm looking at it on my app, Keith goes, "Oh, it flashed. Oh, it's gone," like within seconds. And so we're looking for Bigfoot in a haunted cemetery, and we're playing a damn Civil War song, and a UFO shows up. All of that after we thought someone was going to break into my car because there was this yellow light that looked like a really cheap flashlight moving down the tree line towards my car. And we get down there and there's nobody there, no evidence of anybody there. So this whole area is just like, it's a catching spot. Like the whole thing is this whole interconnectivity, this window area that's bizarre. So we went back in January and caught EVPs, a ghost of, or a voice, a disembodied voice of a little girl said my name.
No.
And, yeah. Really? And there's whistling and there's all kinds of crazy stuff, man. It's a really bizarre spot. And it's only like 20 minutes from my house, 15 minutes from my house.
I can't believe you saw that at one time, man, you know?
Like, I know.
Yeah. Well, so I've got a question for you that you brought up the crashing noise. Yeah. All right. So, and I think you've heard me tell this story, but you know, I've never had a Bigfoot encounter in terms of like thinking I saw Bigfoot. You know what I mean? However, the first time this happened, a friend of mine was at the house. We were in high school, right? 17, 18 years old. I was like at my junior, senior year. He and a friend were over. We were up probably playing D&D, White Wolf, something like that. You know what I mean? But at my house, my parents' house, you know, often we were somewhere else, but this particular time, we're at my parents' house in the woods. You know, it's a really big farm, large forest, ponds and stuff like that. One of my friends was talking about how he could do magic, right? And at this time, I wasn't like, you know, I loved paranormal stuff and obviously 40 and stuff. But, you know, the magic stuff, I was like, oh, all right, let's go outside and you can perform some magic, right? And he's like, all right, I'll do it, you know? So we go outside and he starts like doing some type of ritual. He starts chanting, right? He's like, oh man, I can feel something coming up on my legs, you know, some energy, blah, blah, blah. You know, he was doing this. And I swear to God, man, all of a sudden there was this crazy crash of a tree in the forest, right? At the top of the ridge line. And everybody, you know, the three of us reacted because it was like, holy shit, a tree fell, right? So I'm like, oh, what was that? And then another one, right? And then it was like coming down the hill. And this was moonlight, so I could see the trees, right? Coming down the hill toward us. It sounded like something was knocking full-size trees, not breaking branches. It was the sound of trees being pushed over and slapping the ground, right? Yeah. But I couldn't see any trees going over. And of course, we ran inside the house and we're freaking out, right? A few months later, we went camping it was 12 of us. And we were in an area called Rock Lick, and this is in Magoffin County. And it's on sort of a strip mine. And there's ponds and things. So we went there to go camping. And there were all these stories of a witch in white and this huge 9-foot tall black creature with red eyes, right? Then the story was always that this witch, right, had been hung at her house in this holler, right? What's funny enough, though, you know, Cutchin has stories in where the footprints end about sightings of white ladies and Bigfoot, right? Mm-hmm. Of these huge creatures, which I thought was interesting, you know. So we're camping out, and I was telling the story of my friend at our house, at the house, and he was there with me, and both of those guys were there. We were telling the other 9 people with us about what happened. And he was like, yeah, man, my spell worked. And I was like, your spell didn't work, dude. Something weird happened, but it wasn't that. And he kept going. I was like, then fine, dude. Then do it again. Right. And I swear to God, he started doing it again. And it was the same thing, man. It was this sound, you know, of trees being knocked over, and it was coming down the hill toward us, right? But I could see no trees falling. but I could hear trees falling. It was the strange. Of course, then we jumped in our vehicles and got out of there. But those are the only 2 times. The one other time, there was a night when some friends who were dabbling in magic and doing all kinds of weird stuff, which I was never like involved in, but they were supposedly summoning things and doing all kinds of shit they probably shouldn't do. Now that I know all this stuff and we've, you know what I mean? Now that we've done all this research, I'm like, well, that was a bad idea for those kids to do that. You know, there was one night when I got a phone call and it was like, dude, it was the same with one of the guys that was with me. He was like, dude, I saw something. You know, Brandon called me. He saw something at his house. And then there was another guy and he was like, there could be something at your house. Don't go outside. Right. Listen, my dad was up with me. Right. And it was like midnight or something. And he and I had stayed up kind of late. And again, I was like 17, 18 years old. I wasn't a kid, you know, and I remember I was like, he kept calling me. And then the other guy called me and they're like, dude, something's happened tonight. Something's after everybody. I got off the phone. I was kind of pissed off, you know, and just because I was like, this is ridiculous, you know. So my dad was up. He was in the other room. And I walk out on my porch and I was like, if anything, this is like pitch black darkness and then the forest, right? It kind of slopes up from my house and then there's a garden and a forest. I was like, if anything's out here, come and get me, right? And the moment I said that, I swear I heard the most rumbling, guttural animal sound come from like 15 feet from me in the darkness. And it was the craziest. I mean, I went wide as a sheet, ran inside the house, you know, dad got his gun, you know what I mean? It was like, but you know, I didn't see anything. I didn't see Bigfoot, you know, but I think that's interesting. You know, you mentioned that sound, you know, like as if something has knocked down a tree, you know, but you don't see it. You can't see anything. Right. It's almost as if it's projecting that sound into your mind. Right.
But into everybody's mind. Because it's not just you that hears it.
Yeah.
It's the whole group of people that are there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's weird, dude. I don't know. I mean, there's something to that, right? There has to be something to that.
You know, it goes back to all this stuff just being connected and the way that it works with like our bodies and how we pick up on all this different chatter, you know, this static and how we interpret it and how we sometimes interpret it the same way as other people that are there, but sometimes we interpret completely differently than the people that are there.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's those crazy stories about like a group of people will be like in a hotel or something and they'll all see something mysterious, but they all have a completely different description of what they saw at the same time in the same place. But it looks like a dragon to one person and it looks like a person to one, you know, whoever. And then no one has anything that corroborates with the other, but they all experienced something at that time. And it's fascinating.
There like, I remember there's a famous, like a fairy sighting. It was a group of kids and they all reported seeing little people in cars driving around, right? And the little people in cars interacted with them. I forget the name of the case. Anyway, whenever the investigators interviewed the kids separately, they all saw the same thing, but it was different, right? Like the things told them the same things, right? The conversation that they all witnessed and participated in was the same, but the way that the size of the beings, the colors of the beings, what they were wearing, the cars, the type of cars that they were driving, like all these things were all different. And it's like, were these kids perceiving this, you know what I mean? It looked different to all of them, you know? Anytime there are these sightings of like Nordic aliens, or Bigfoot or monsters, demons, you know, stuff like that. And it's like people are seeing these like muscular things, right? You know, but like those things would have to be, in order for them to be chiseled and muscular, they would have to be like the Nordic aliens would have to be working out. Or, you know what I'm saying? Like they wouldn't have those types of muscle tones and this like Arnold Schwarzenegger kind of like barbarian look, right? Yeah. Unless they were like doing things that would promote, you know, they're like lifting things. We're talking about non-physical creatures, right? Or metaphysical beings. And if they're coming from another dimension, right, then they have to be working out in the other dimension, right? Yeah. So anyway, that makes me think that what we're seeing in those cases is a projection, right? It's Definitely. Something projecting strength. Otherwise, you know, some of these things would have to be slobs. You know, they're like the monster that doesn't go to the gym all the time. You know, they can't all be alpha apex predators, you know. I mean, I guess it could be wrong. There are monsters hunting people in other dimensions. I don't know, you know. But,
well, it draws back to like tribal primitive like fears. You know, if you're out in the wild as a, you know, I don't want to say caveman, but an early man, and you come across some other creature that is jacked, you know, that's when you run away. That's when you're in fear. You're in the flight mode or the fight mode, I suppose. It's going to trigger one or the other.
right.
But if you encounter, you know, some little boy or some little girl or something, like you're not threatened at all. And, you know, maybe that fight or flight is part of the requirement for you to further that connection at that time, that experience. Because if you can't get your mind into that state, it can't interpret the data that you're about to receive. So, you know, that could be something else where people see something differently and get a different message or whatever, you know, despite being in the same place. If their mental space is different, I mean, I think that's a big part of it for sure.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense, man. Again, it's like those parts of the phenomena are what make it hard to, you know, when people are trying to get DNA evidence of Bigfoot, you know, it's like, I don't know, man. You know, I don't know if there's any DNA to find, and if you did, what's it going to tell you? Maybe the DNA you find is just going to be interpreted however, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that's an interesting point.
And dude, the whole thing with when I first watched Twin Peaks, and there was the log lady, okay,
yeah,
and definitely in the wake of engaging with the Pennyroyal mystery and then making the show and stuff, but all the things that have happened, Twin Peaks is like totally recontextualized for me. You know what I mean? Like it's weird, but anyway, but the log lady, I didn't get at the time that I watched it that was a fetch. It was like this idea of, you know, the fairies leaving a piece of wood behind when they snatch a child. Mm-hmm. And then that piece of wood through glamour transforms into the baby, right? Yeah, you just you wonder about all of this stuff, you know? It's like, if they found physical evidence of Bigfoot, is it only physical evidence of Bigfoot because they believe it's physical evidence of Bigfoot, right? Yeah. It's transformed into that, right? But it could be anything, you know? It's a piece of moss. You know what I mean? I don't know, you know? But it's just interesting that there is this element of whatever this is. I mean, it's just that it's all one thing, but also not. You know what I mean? It's I don't know. It's so strange.
It is, but I love it. I love it. This is, you know, this is why I'm here, to talk to people about this sort of thing, right? It's like, if I didn't find anything interesting in paranormal stuff, if I was a total skeptic, I can't imagine what I would be doing with my life right now, because my life has changed so much. My personality has changed so much that this is all I do. Yeah, I sit around and I think about things, and I hope that someday I will encounter someone and have a conversation where I can say the thing that I thought 3 months ago. You know what I mean? And I can't imagine what it's like for you, because I often describe you to other people as plugging a computer into the wall that you can't unplug, and it just keeps outputting data. Right? I told Steven Snyder that talking to Nathan is like plugging a computer in that you can't shut off, and it just keeps pumping out information all the time. So like, I know that you operate in the same way that I do in that regard, because there's just constant input coming in, and then you process it so fast that you can't get rid of it fast enough. So when you do have an opening, it's like a fire hydrant, you know, just boom, here it comes.
Yeah. Yeah. Ready or not, man, here's a bunch of weird shit. Hopefully it connects together, you know.
You know, and the great part is that often not only does it connect together, sometimes you make those connections when you verbalize it. You know, I found that a lot.
Yeah. You know, Darian's like that. He definitely like will throw shit out. He doesn't even realize how it connects to it. So, you know what I mean? But like once he puts it out there, it's like, you know, it's he'll be talking about a poem from the 1500s that he read, you know, and then you're like, that connects to this, man, you know. But it is interesting. Yeah, I don't know, man. I love it. I agree with you, though. I think that's, for me too. You know, it's a big part of this is getting to have an outlet to try to tell other people some of this stuff and be like, listen to this.
Yeah, for sure.
And they don't think you're crazy, you know.
Well, I mean, that's just comes with it. You have to wear that coat, right? You have to be the crazy person. So we've been talking about like sort of cornucopia of weirdness. I wanted to, if you don't mind and if you can, let's go over a brief rundown of what Pennyroyal Season 2 has kind of been about. Like, I'd like to, people who haven't listened to Pennyroyal, first of all, go do it. Pennyroyal, both seasons have been just tremendous. Nathan, you've done such a great job. I love listening all of them. I'd like to get other people to do the same if you haven't already. If you're here listening to this show, there's a good chance you've already listened to it. But break it down for someone who has just discovered, my show and they don't know about Pennyroyal yet. So what's season 2 like?
Yeah, man. Yeah, totally. I tried to structure the story. A lot of it was stuff that I couldn't fit into the first season, and really a continuation of the whole story. The motif of the second season is, it really comes from this idea of whether or not some of us are experiencing some type of like path or road to initiation of some sort, and I only say that in terms of just like whatever not like we're being initiated into something, but it's like that process of discovery, right? Or whatever you want to call it. That got me thinking about roads. I've always kind of gathered stories and worked on since the second season of True Detective was about to come out. The creator of that show mentioned in an interview that the second season was going to be about the occult history of the United States transportation system, right? And I was like, that's going to be great, dude, And then it wasn't about that, right? But I was like, man, somebody should tell the story. Like that guy had to have accumulated a lot of research about the occult history of the U.S. highway system in order to even make that statement, right? But he obviously figured out this is too esoteric to try to tell, Joe Schmo that's watching True Detective on HBO, all this stuff. So they told something more prosaic. But when you look into it, you to that particular angle of research, you find tons of stuff, right? And so I thought that was a great motif for the second season of Pennyroyal, was this idea of, the occult history of roads in America, because Somerset in Pulaski County is such a transportation hub. It's a nexus point because of the railroad that goes from Cincinnati to here. Definitely at the turn of the century, you had to come through Somerset to get through the Midwest, and definitely going from Tennessee to Chicago, and even Northeast, you had to come through Somerset. So that's a lot of energy. That's a lot of people. We've got the Cumberland River here, and that's why the Battle of Mill Springs happened here. It was like one of the most important spots strategically in the Civil War. Things like that got me thinking. And then obviously Highway 39 is one of the oldest roads in America, right? Because of the Great Warrior Way, of the buffalo traces. That all just kind of naturally formed into this second season talking about roads. And the first episode is really about the connection between Route 66 and this Interstate 66 here in Pulaski County that was a failed road project by Senator Hal Rogers, right? But he convinced everybody that actually this was going to connect to Route 66 and invoked this like 1950s perfect America, right? This nostalgia and raised like, I think it was $22 million. And they only built 800 feet of the road here in Somerset, right? And so that was the jumping off point, but really the reason why I was telling the story of Route 66 is that it does connect into the Freemasons. That road, absolutely, not a conspiracy. That road was built by Freemasons that were part of the road commission. It was Hal Rogers' invocation of the 1950s perfect America that I think if you're listening to episode 1, you're probably, you don't know that in episode 9, we're going to come all the way back around to that, because that's what the fascists use and the traditionalists use in America, right? To try to invoke this perfect post-war 1950s America as like, don't you remember when everything was perfect then? We've got to go back to that, right? And that ties into Jack Kerouac, and this idea of the beatniks and hitchhiking and the roads. And so there is definitely between early episodes and later episodes, a sort of a circularity, a foreshadowing. And then the second episode is about Downard, James Shelby Downard, now our investigation into how he's connected into the Pennyroyal mystery. A lot of research we did with Adam Gorightly. I think we've made a lot of inroads into that mystery. But Downard's father paved most of the roads in the Midwest, right? And was Freemason and tied into this whole story. The third episode is really about hedgerows and highways, which is taken from a quote from the Bible, which I thought was interesting. That says hedgerows and highways. But, that episode is really about witches and witchcraft, folklore. We talk a lot about those sorts of things and are really setting up, we talk about psychic questing also with Charles Topham, because a lot of the pennyroll mystery, what's been happening with us, the way that things have unfolded in the story and to us and revealed itself to us. And I think you could say the same thing of like Greg and Dana and the Hellier crew. There's an element of psychic questing. When you read about Andrew Collins and all these guys that were doing psychic questing in the 1970s in England, there's a lot of elements of that. It's just everything's digital now, And then the fourth episode, we carry that further into hyperstitions, and we introduce the character of Charles. Everyone calls him Chuck Hayes, which again, it was like, right. I've told Darian and you've heard me say this so many times. Like, I absolutely didn't think we could find another Guterma, right? I mean, how could you get any weirder than that guy coming to Somerset, right? That Mr. X. And then we find, Chuck Hayes, who is tied into some of the most classic, the octopus, Danny Casolaro, and these like storied conspiracy theories that all connect back to Somerset, right? And even the creation of fucking Bitcoin, this guy's in the mix. And that sort of naturally led into the fifth episode, which is about the documents that we received, right? And it's just strange. I want to say this about that was sort of like the that was the mid-season finale, but that was shocking to get those documents, and it had all that stuff about what we were researching, right? But also that the documents were about Willis Carto and how Carto was funding Hoffman and Grimstead, and they were working with him, and that's where the Downard stuff comes from. It's so bizarre that we would get those documents, and the fact that they dealt with gold certificates from the Philippines, and that's where Guterma's in the Philippines. Downard has gold certificates from the Philippines, and it was like these weird reverberations over and over inside the story itself. It's like when you throw the rock in the pond and the waves start, but then they start bouncing back and crossing over each other. It's like within the story as it was unfolding, that was happening. The latter half of the season was really going a little bit wider. The sixth episode, we really focus on what folklore is and talk to Delaney Stevens, a local folklorist here. Seventh episode was As Above. That's our UFO episode. It was a mega episode, man. I interviewed so many people that had something to say about UFOs, and it all came together, and I was like, got to put it all in there, right? And then the eighth episode is So Below. So it's like UFOs in the seventh episode, roads into the sky, roads into space. And then the eighth episode is sort of roads beneath America. And then we come out of the subterranean narrative, right, into this Through Darkest America is the most recent episode. And it's about fascism in America. And really, it's not out of the blue. I mean, it is this weird part of the story that we kept coming across. The Carto connection, Hoffman, all these guys, Downard, Kerouac, and for me, the ninth episode is the most important episode in terms of trying to communicate. Definitely something, I love exploring the magical side of all this and the mystery of it, but the message in the ninth episode, I think, is something that we have to address about our communities that we're in, online especially, but just in general, in terms of fascism growing. I mean, something has changed. We talked to Michael Hughes, Adam Go-Rightly, all these guys. It just seems like the seed was planted a long time ago, and it's grown and grown and grown. And where not to sound political, but I mean, it definitely is a political thing in terms of the conspiracy community 30 years ago was very left-leaning. And the right-wing sort of extremists were a small part of that, right? And now it's dominated by that. And the left-leaning conspiracy theorists are far and few between. They've been forced out. But it's kind of, in a weird way that's filtered out through the paranormal and Fortean communities. And there's a lot of misogyny and there's a lot of racism. Those are all things I think we need to just cop to. You know what I mean? Like, it's ugly, it sucks, but like, I think we all have to talk about it. So the ninth episode was really for that. The episode that's coming out probably this weekend is about sort of, everybody that I talked to, or not everybody, most people I interviewed that were guests on the show, I asked them about, what is magic in your life? But also, what's re-enchantment? How do we activate re-enchantment in the world, in our lives? What's magic? And so this next episode, coming off of the sort of dark fascist episode, the Nazi episode, which also is almost 3 hours long because there's a lot of shit to cover. But I really wanted to do that whole thing justice and really show the research we put into it and trying to track that. But so the 10th episode is meant to be much more lighthearted, much more like, let's talk about magic, right? And then the final episode, the finale, is really all of this stuff coming together into what you've heard us talk about a ton, information theory. There's a lot about IFA and a lot of our research about, it's back to the cybernetics and back to how the talk that I gave at Strange Realities about decoding the universe and this idea of information theory, try to bring all that together. I hope people aren't pissed off, at the end of the season. It's like, there isn't we didn't find Chuck Hayes and, kidnap him, or, you know what I'm saying? Like, nothing crazy happened that we're like, we figured it out, but really it's just to get everybody to the point where we are now and set up what we're going to explore next, what we're being pushed to explore. And it's time travel, man.
Awesome. So there's a few things that I have to double back to. And the first is, you mentioned the Battle of Mill Springs and being near the Cumberland River. I think it's really fitting that whenever we first spoke, back in November 2 years ago.
That's crazy, dude. That's so crazy that
I know.
I've known you for 2 years.
I know. It's weird, man. My life has changed so much in the last 3 years. But we talked on the podcast and before and after. And I told you my crazy story about Smithland and Livingston County. And I asked for your guys' opinions on it. And I'm still working on that project. Like it's everything I've got. But the Cumberland River starts at Smithland, Kentucky, and goes all the way through the state, and how fitting is it that we met and talked about a town that no one knows exists on the Cumberland River, and it ties into your town. Right. It's so nuts.
I cut this out of the show. I didn't put this in the show, but Josh Van Hook, I just couldn't fit it in. I mean, I might put in some extended audio, but Josh Van Hook, which if you're not familiar with the show or don't know who that is, he's a guide here. He's a former Marine, but he's also got an outdoor company, a guide company, really good friend of ours. And so he really was into research about Jesse James, and he talks about it in the show. But man, like 8 months ago, a while back, I interviewed him early on about the Jesse James stuff. This was right around the time that we were really chasing down some of this, like red hole. Remember?
Yeah,
we were really looking
vividly
into the horned being that came out of the earth. It was like they thought it was Satan, but it sounded like Pan, right? And so there was this idea of like, could that have been the entrance to Edidorpa, right? And so I was talking to him about that. He mentioned the fact that, now I don't know if this is he did logistical stuff, right? That's what he did in the Marines. He was he figured out how to get the tanks from here to here through the terrain, right? And he told me, in his opinion, looking at the maps and what he knew professionally and doing this research about Smithland and Edidorpa, and I told him about that stuff. He, of course, in his mind, 3 days ride from Smithland when you come off the river, right? And then if you followed the river, it would be to the cave systems here in Pulaski County, right? And so he was trying to draw a connection that what they're describing in Edidorpa, that cave isn't there, but that it's, down here. Now, I don't believe that to be the case. I think it is there. And I think the story was really it is playing off the idea of Mammoth Cave. Yeah. It's not Mammoth Cave, but definitely like that whole cave system, that part of Kentucky. Mm-hmm. But I thought that was really interesting that he drew, you know what I mean? He was like, I think they made it all the way here, man. Which, I mean, it's still possible,
Yeah, for sure.
And that was his professional opinion that, you could do a 3 day ride from Smithland along the Cumberland River. And the way the plateau is, the Pennyroyal Plateau and the river, this is where, like, the only place to cross the Cumberland is at Somerset. I mean, in Pulaski County. That's why the Battle of Mill Springs was such a pivotal battle, because in order to transport soldiers and horses and supplies, you had to go through this area across the Cumberland. And there wasn't a better place to cross Kentucky. And so his argument was, if these guys were coming from the west, east, they would naturally be funneled into this county. Right?
And you know where they were coming from, right? Smithland, Kentucky.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, Smithland. Yeah,
They had to. There's the big commissary there. That's the natural or the historical, preserved.
That's right. Yeah,
commissary that they used during the Civil War.
Yeah, and they did transport stuff down from Smithland all the way to Somerset.
Yeah, isn't that bizarre? There was something that I don't know. It somehow eluded me whenever we talked for the first time. Like I didn't even think about, but I didn't know about the Battle of Mill Springs. I'm not a Civil War historian by any stretch of the imagination, but there's all these connections that you get from it goes back, man. You start putting out the output and then you connect the dots with other people, with yourself, with that, whatever. Yeah, it's really interesting that our sort of starting point ends up being leads to all these other connections. It's fascinating.
The thing too, man, I think, and the deeper we get into this and, is finding these connections that go further back, right? Mm-hmm. The ones that go back to your childhood. Or something that, I'm saying like early on where it's like, it's decades earlier. You start wondering, how could that have, that connects to this? How could something would have had to put these things into motion back then, right? That's what you initially think because, you're in a world that teaches you that time is linear and everything is causally related, right? So it's like, it had to have happened back then in order to happen now, right? Dan Dutton has experienced a lot of stuff like that, right? And especially right now, some things are happening with Dan and Dandyland. When if you come down here for the Goblin Market, right? Because there's a lot of stuff that's happened that we haven't talked about, online and stuff. But you and I talked about some of it while you were here in January. Some weird things are happening, but where we're sort of being taken in the third season involves Terrence McKenna and his Time Wave Zero. Okay. Mm-hmm. I was not familiar with this at all. Right.
Oh, really?
No, dude, I wasn't. Okay. So when I was in college, I wasn't reading psychedelic stuff, and psychedelic books and things. I definitely was doing psychedelics, but I wasn't oh man, let's, what's the story? I wasn't reading Castaneda or Terrence McKenna books or anything like that. I enjoyed the drugs, but wasn't into the literature about it. I had a weird trip one time where I had this realization and I drew this out, and this was like 2000, 2001. I drew this out, and it is this object at the end of time, and I was thinking about like 2012 and stuff like that, and that the reason why more and more synchronicities were happening is that we were getting closer and closer to this thing, and the information was bouncing off of it and coming back, right? So when an event happened, it was propagated forward in time, hit this mirror, and then bounced back and crossed our path again. And that's why, and the closer we got to it, the quicker the synchronicities would come, right? But I drew it all out.
I dig it 100%. I'm all in.
Right. Well, that's what Terrence McKenna, that's Time Wave Zero, right?
Yeah.
Well, someone sent me this message recently and was like, have you ever heard of this before? And I was like, this is what I drew. And I've got like the writings and stuff. This is from, 2 decades ago. I mean, I was typing up shit about this. I was telling everybody, and I was like, I had this weird vision, And so I was like, well, this is strange. Well, Darian gets into, I've started reading True Hallucinations, where they recount their trip. He and his brother and that group of psychonauts. But Darian's further along than I am. And he was like, today he was messaging me. He was like, dude, he had a crazy encounter in the Philippines with a group of Nazis that had a mining company, right? And it was this weird, like Gaterma-esque kind of thing. And that he runs into the guy again in like Boulder, Colorado. And it's like, years and years later, he runs in. He was like this crazy synchronicity. But in that book, they start talking about all these synchronicities that are happening, right? All these events that are sort of spiraling out of their interaction with this idea. And then he starts to realize that there are things that happened in his life as a child, in his teenage years, all these things that connect to what's happening. That's why it's supernatural, is because there's no way that all these things could be connected unless something set these things in motion, right? But then it's like, that's only if things are causal, because what's happening now may be causing those things to happen in the past, or even causing shifts in the timeline, like a Mandela effect almost, right? Anyway, but those are the kinds of things that were happening the entire time that we've been in, in the last 3 years, 4 years that we've, really been hitting this hardcore, there have been tons of things like that, and our research into the CCRU, Nick Land, hyperstitions. We had a guest on that from Amsterdam, Raul Elizabeth Cabrales, right, who is a philosophical researcher of time. Okay. And esotericism. And so that guest talked about this. We were talking about hyperstitions, and Darian mentions Voorhees, right? And his whole Ukbar, Tertius, the story that they made up an ancient civilization. And the more that they talked about it, it was a prank, and then it became real, right?
Yeah.
And so Darian thought that was the first instance of a hyperstition, right? That guest explained that, Rowan explained that wasn't a hyperstition until Nick Land created the concept of hyperstitions in 1992. And once Nick Land created that concept, the Voorhees story became a hyperstition, right? This idea of like a future event can recontextualize the timeline, and that there is no linear time. Things that you remember happening in the past actually didn't happen in the past until what happened now just happened. So anyway, we're being pushed that also it involves King Arthur, dude. There's this crazy connection of King Arthur to the Glastonbury Zodiac, which is the Somerset Zodiac, and a connection to King Arthur in Kentucky. Yeah, dude, that the Holy Grail. There's a ton of research about this. There are people that believe that King Arthur was actually a Phoenician that came to Hyperborea, Britain. There's a whole thing with this, and that they left there and brought the Grail to the United States, to fucking Kentucky. And there's this stone here, right? The Redbird petroglyph, and then another thing called the Fletcher Guidestone. And there's a true belief that they buried the Holy Grail in Kentucky. Okay. Yeah. That's all going to be in the third season.
Wow.
Spoilers, man.
No, I'm glad. I'm looking forward to where that goes. I have some things.
Sorry to go off on a crazy tangent too, man. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. Not tangential at all. It's par for the course. I'm used to it. And I'm looking at the chat, in the live stream, and Matthew has asked, have you looked at Oak Ridge and the weird shit that they're doing there that could be causing this? It goes back to even the 1900s when John Hendricks saw a window of what was built 40 years later.
So do you know that story? Are you familiar with that story?
Not as familiar as you are.
so like that story, if you go to Oak Ridge, I haven't been down there to see the museum where this is, but they printed that guy, he's a farmer, tilling his land or walking the woods, but anyway, it was his farm, and he was like struck by a beam of light, or there's like he saw a window, but he had this vision of a city being built on his farm. Right? This huge city and all these people and all these things happening. I think he even describes a mushroom cloud, right? Or something. It's crazy. But, this is, it was early 1900s. Yeah, I can't remember the exact year, but yeah, it was like 40 years before, turn of the century. And then they obviously built Oak Ridge to construct, that's part of the bomb project, the atomic bomb project. They built it exactly on that guy's farm. Right. But at the time that he had the vision, he went to the newspaper. Right. And he told everybody about what he saw. And they printed articles in the newspaper about how crazy he was and how ridiculous this was. Right. It's one of those times that we actually have documented evidence of the guy having the vision, of his description. And then the rest of his life, he was treated like an idiot and a nut job. Then he dies, right? And then in whatever it was, 1940 or, they build Oak Ridge on his farm. And I think those articles are up at the museum in Oak Ridge. I've always wanted to go down there and see that stuff because that's bonkers, right? I mean, to me, that's verified psi activity. I'm sure people, researchers, we're looking at the Zetetic Scholar journal right now, research wise and in the lodge. I think those guys would probably be like, well, he just was lucky. Coincidence, 1 in a million, but it happened. But it's like, that's gotta be, like, hey, James Randi, if you were still alive, you owe that guy some money, dude, like, this is verified. We have a newspaper. It happened.
Let's go back to McKenna for a second, if we can. You mentioned Time Wave Zero, his theory of the end of the world, basically, right?
Yeah.
And it ends up not really coming to fruition the way that everyone thought, that that believed him thought it would. It ended in 2012, right? It coincided with the Mayan calendar thing that we all lived through.
Yes, but the person, I'm not going to reveal this stuff because this is going to be part of the 3rd season, but
okay,
the person that sent me, the researcher that sent me the story, said, have you heard of Time Wave Zero? And then I was like, oh, having all these like memories back to, what I'd seen, on mushrooms. That person laid out what happened in 2012, and it absolutely meshes with everything we're researching this season. Cybernetics, a lot of other stuff. Like, when you read it, it's like, no shit. And this person has really heavily researched this, and it's not woo woo. It's like, this is crazy. And it's like, it did happen. It just didn't happen in the way that we all thought it would. Right. Okay. And it is absolutely fascinating. That's going to be a big part of that.
Okay, so follow-up question. I don't know how legitimate any of this is, and I'll get into it in a second. When did CERN first fire up?
I don't know off the top of it. Was it 2012?
I believe it was 2012. You know how the internet is. You find something, you have no idea what basis of it is true. But I watched this video this one time. I was into the Mandela effect real hard for a minute because I naturally discovered the Mandela effect when I tried to look up the Berenstain Bears and only could find the Berenstain Bears. And I was like, this is insane. I remember in 2nd grade asking my mom how to say this word because of the STEIN, whatever. Anyway, so I'm digging into this and I find this video. It's this really weird video that claims it's footage from inside some office party at CERN before they fired up. Have you seen this video, or do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And there's all these weird signs and stuff, and it mentioned one of the signs says something about Mandela or whatever. And that whole thing, I don't know how true that is, but if it really did fire up at the end of Time Wave Zero, is this something that you've looked into?
No, I haven't, but now I will. No, I mean, I have thought about CERN and the Mandela effect, definitely that, but I hadn't thought about connecting it to Time Wave Zero. Definitely, I've always been like, did they, did that cause the proliferation of parallel worlds or something like that? Because wasn't there there's even footage, not when it was fired up, but since it's been open, there was footage of a group of occultists in robes at CERN.
Yeah.
You seen that video? It's not when they fired it up, but it's another time.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, we were just joking around. It was just like a prank video. And it's like, well, was it? Dude, on the topic of the Mandela effect, I didn't put this in the 9th episode. I'm going to talk about it a little bit, I think, in the final episode, the finale of this season. But the whole idea of historical revisionism and people re-engineering reality, that came from Darian, right? And we were having a conversation, and he just had one of these crazy thoughts where it was like, what if the revisionists are trying to change history, right? Like, these guys are esotericists, or they're studying magic. It's like, what if they're trying to do? Because we know that Michael Bertio, the famous magician, that he knows time magic rituals, right? We know the Bait Cabal were into time magic and vortex magic. So if these people are doing that type of magic, then these, I guess, right-wing esotericists, are doing things like that. And so if you were trying to erase the Holocaust, which seems insane, and I know this is just, I didn't put this in the show because I do think this is a controversial thing to even consider, right? That these guys would think that they could try to use magic to alter. It's not like physically change time, but it's like just shift everybody's consciousness enough that it didn't happen the way that you think. You know what I'm saying? It's like, what if they were targeting, these moments in history? That's why I was talking about, like, the JFK assassination, right? These hinges. Even Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated in World War I, right? Yeah. And remember, the guy was going to assassinate him, and he failed. And so like he went and sat down at a bar and started getting drunk because he was like, I failed. And then the Archduke Ferdinand's car gets lost, ends up pulling up beside the guy's bar. And the dude's like, holy shit. It's like this crazy reordering of reality in some like insanely coincidental way, right? And you look at like the JFK assassination. There are all these like different ways it could have happened, right? I mean, a lot of evidence that it happened various ways, all of them possible. It's like there was this fracturing. And so I was just thinking, even the Titanic, the way the Titanic went down and the whole Titanica story, or the wreck of the Titan, that was written years before the Titanic. It's like there are these weird events that sort of ripple through time and space and are kind of fractured. And it's like, what if some of these people used magic? Like maybe those are weak spots, and they're able to change things. So if they were trying to re-engineer reality, is that why we're experiencing the Mandela effect? It's actually these esotericists slightly shifting time. I don't know.
And independently, I've thought of almost each of those examples that you've given. I've never thought of them as a time magic ritual.
Well, or just like it's like if you were a magician using time magic, that's one of the points I would focus on, because there are a lot of entry points because no one knows exactly what happened. You know what I mean? It's like a window that's broken, that's shattered. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of ways to get into the creases of time there. Plant something, let it slowly spread across the decades, shift everybody. Some people are aware of the shift and they have fragments of those memories left over. Some people aren't. They've fully shifted. I'm just like you, dude. I remember the Berenstain Bears thing. I do. The Mandela thing too. I thought he was dead.
Oh yeah.
And so like those things are weird. I know there are lots of other examples, but God, there's a great episode of Beyond Creepy. Do you know Beyond Creepy?
I don't.
It's a YouTube channel, and the guy, he narrates like 3 stories, and he's a great researcher. The stories are fantastic. Almost always they're stories I've never heard of, and that's what's great about it, It's like the deep cuts of high strangeness, And so I'm sure it takes a lot of time to do it, but really great videos. But one of them is about a VHS tape. It's a tape of, I can't think of the exact details right now, but ultimately something happens. They remember that they have a tape of that, right, event. And they go down there, they have this VHS collection. They go down, they find the tape because apparently that didn't happen, but they've got it on tape. They like leave the tape downstairs on a table and then run back up to make a phone call. And I think they do make the phone call to somebody to say, no, this happened. I've got evidence of it, and they were going to run it to a news station, and show them. And then they went back downstairs and the tape was gone. The suggestion was that time, or there were time police, or that, you know what I mean? It was like, oops, got to clean that little bit that we didn't change up, and that didn't get shifted. And they went and stole the tape. And then, so the person was like, I swear to God, this is true. Time shifted. They took the tape away from me. I mean, I love stuff like that, but I do think there's something to it. There's something to time magic and all these things. I swear, man, there's just so much stuff that's happened in this whole pennyroyal mystery. Things are just related incredibly across time in just weird ways that defy logic and reason. I think a lot of times, and I talk about this in the next couple of episodes, it's difficult to explain to someone what a synchronicity is because it's so personal. Mm-hmm. It's like witnessing a miracle. If I try to describe to you the miracle I've just seen, that's an ineffable moment, and it's like, of course, you're not going to be able to understand what I'm talking about or how the gravity of the moment, I think most synchronicities are that way. The big ones, though, like some of this shit that we've discovered with Gaterma and Chuck Hayes and stuff, those are things that are just like, doesn't matter who you are. When you look at it, it's like, that's impossible. That is impossible that these things are connected, but they are. That's where the magic is, man,
The magic is definitely everywhere. Okay. You have professed multiple times that you have no interest in pursuing the practitioner of magic in your life. You have this resolve about you that it's not for you. You're not going to do it. And that's fine. That's totally cool.
Yeah.
But I have said multiple times myself that you guys just don't know that you're doing this magic down there. And you are totally altering the landscape on so many levels, just not only looking at the things. And you love your second order cybernetics, right? Just by looking at it, you're changing it. Also, you're putting this stuff out and it's affecting other people and they're also changing it. Matthew Berg will agree with me. You are totally technomancers and you refuse to accept and believe that, but you have fundamentally sort of sculpted this whole phase of your life around magic, doing magic that you refuse to admit you're doing. And I love it.
It's true. This is true.
Imagine what you could do if you perform some crazy ritual down there in Somerset and you have all of this energy now, like, you know, that's just built up because you refuse to admit you have it. So you haven't even released it yet. You're just seeing the effects of it oozing out of you. Now, if you release that, man, it'd be like a locomotive. Maybe you're the one that's changing time and you're going back and setting up this JFK shit and it's all you. So you can discover it to further that in your mind that you haven't done this yet. So now you have more energy so you can use it for something else that we don't know about yet.
Have you seen the film? It's a Spanish film called Time Crimes.
I have
where the guy watch it because it's like this guy is fighting against this other guy. I think there's like 3 versions of him. It turns out it's him at different points in the timeline, right? It's him, but he's the one that actually set the whole problem that he's trying to solve. He set in motion accidentally. You know, maybe we did. I still, I just think for me, like the formal practice of magic, obviously magical thinking and we study magic, you know what I mean? Like we're obviously doing experiments with magic. I definitely am. I obviously believe in it. I'm very much open to it. I just think for me, the formal practice of it, I don't know, man. I'm just wary. I just feel like there's already so much weird shit happening. I'm just afraid that it'll just open up a whole other can of worms,
I get it for sure.
It's hard enough to go to sleep at night, man.
We've been going here for a while and I know you don't care that it is, the wee hours of the morning because this is when you operate. This is when you do the magic you refuse to believe that you're doing.
Right.
So I'm going to go ahead and let you wrap up things, plug Penny Royal and the Patreon and all that good stuff.
Yeah, man. Again, dude, thanks for having me on tonight and having me on the show again, dude. I love chatting with you. Also, you co-hosted the live stream with me too, which again, I thank you so much for, and all the research that, we do together. And I love it, man. So thank you for that. If anybody's interested in checking out Penny Royal, which I hope you do, you can go to pennyroyalpodcast.com is our website. The show's on Spotify, Apple, all those things. We've also got Patreon called the Liminal Lodge, where we share our research, kind of real time talk about all the stuff that we're kind of figuring out. A lot of the stuff that's in the second season, we talked about all through the year. It was just the second season is sort of how it all comes together into a narrative form. But yeah, if you're interested in helping us dig into the mystery and solve some things, which a lot of stuff in the second season came from the Lodge. It really did, definitely check that out. And if you enjoy the show, definitely give us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It always helps us out. So this guy too, make sure you review this show, 5 stars.
Thank you so much for coming back on the show and doing another live stream too. I can't wait till the next one, whenever we're probably gathered here sometime next year talking about season 3 of Penny Royal.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thanks, man. Thanks for having me on too.
Okay. Good night, everybody. Peace. Love you.
Until next time, keep the fire going.